Graham Ellis, 58 years old, 18 years of flying commercial routes for Orion Pacific Airlines based out of Seattle. And just like that, your position has been eliminated. The words came from Brent Holloway, the new director of flight operations, who didn't even look up from his laptop as he said them. He sat behind his sleek desk, tapping his pen against a budget forecast spreadsheet like it determined my worth. Your compensation no longer aligns with our new efficiency model, he added flatly, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. I didn't bother to open it. Through the window behind him, I could see the tarmac and a familiar 737 preparing for takeoff, Flight 308 to San Diego. Captain Isabel Grant would be in command today. I signed off on her certification 2 years ago. Anything else? I asked. Brent shook his head, already typing something else. HR is expecting you downstairs. I buttoned my jacket out of instinct, necessity, and turned toward the door. Captain Ellis, I paused. We'll need your uniform returned before you leave the building. Of course. Outside, Amanda from HR waited with a clipboard, her smile tight and rehearsed. As we walked down the hallway, my phone buzzed. A text from First Officer Nate Kim. Is it true? News travels fast in an airline. I didn't reply. Down in the locker room, I folded my uniform with precision that only military habits could teach. I placed my captain's hat on top of the stack, and then I saw it. A small, sun-faded photo taped to the inside of my locker. My first flight crew at Orion Pacific, all smiles and nervous ambition. They had no idea their instructor had just been grounded. If you've ever been blindsided like this, after giving your best for decades, stick around. There's more to this story. And if stories of dignity, quiet strength, and redemption speak to you, consider subscribing. It means a lot. The badge clicked as I dropped it into the tray. Keys followed. Locker combination card, access pass. One by one, symbols of a life I'd built, now surrendered like borrowed tools returned after the job was done. Amanda stood quietly nearby, watching without expression. HR had been trained well. Neutral tone, neutral face, nothing personal. I changed in silence, swapping the uniform I had worn for nearly 2 decades for a faded blue shirt and jeans, civilian clothes. But they felt unfamiliar, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. I folded my uniform with precision, creases sharp, sleeves aligned, hat placed gently on top. That habit never left me, not even after all these years since my last Air Force deployment. When I closed the locker door, my eyes lingered on the photo taped inside. The first crew I ever trained at Orion Pacific, young, uncertain, hopeful. Most of them were captains now, commanding their own routes, mentoring their own co-pilots. They wouldn't know what happened today. Not yet. I started flying when I was 19, worked the night shift at a refueling station just to afford lessons, slept in my car more than once. By 25, I was flying cargo routes across the Rockies. Then came the Air Force. 11 years, countless missions, some routine, some unforgettable. At 38, I joined Orion Pacific when they were still building their name. Back then, Harold Quinn, the founder, personally recruited me. He wanted discipline, precision, and he knew military pilots brought both. Build me a team I can trust with lives, he had said. And I did, for 18 years, until now. The walk to the parking structure felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the weight of the envelope in my hand, or maybe the silence after so many years of noise, radios, checklists, cockpit chatter. Seattle's morning air was crisp. I stood for a moment, watching a plane take off overhead. The rumble used to steady me. Now it echoed in my chest like something lost. Back in my car, I didn't start the engine. I sat there, hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield. This wasn't how I pictured it ending. I had missed anniversaries, birthdays, even my daughter's college orientation. Because someone needed a last-minute fill-in. Because a rookie pilot needed guidance. Because the job mattered. Not once had I asked for recognition. But I had assumed, perhaps naively, that loyalty counted for something. Orion Pacific had once been a pilot's airline. When Harold Quinn was in charge, he walked the hangars in his old bomber jacket, shaking hands with ground crew, sharing coffee with flight ops. He knew our names, our stories. But after his retirement 3 years ago, things shifted. His son Marshall took the reins. Oten brought in consultants, efficiency experts who read quarterly reports like scripture. They trimmed the fat, yes. But eventually, they began cutting into the muscle. Less simulator time, fewer check rides, flight schedules packed tighter than safety margins should allow. We warned them, quietly, respectfully. But warnings aren't welcome when they interrupt a growth chart. And now, here I was, retired by spreadsheet, dismissed by someone who'd never sat in a cockpit during a snowstorm, engine 2 out, trusting nothing but training and instinct. This wasn't just my story. It was happening everywhere. But this morning, it had my name on it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun had started to climb over the hills east of the city. Light streamed through the evergreens, casting long shadows across my front lawn. I sat for a while before going inside. The house was quiet. It had been for years. My daughter Emily was in Boston finishing her graduate degree. The divorce had been finalized 3 winters ago. Amicable in theory, but hollow in practice. This was the part they never prepared you for. Not the landing. The silence after. I made a pot of coffee, out of habit more than need. Poured it into the ceramic mug with the Orion Pacific crest, the one they gave me after 10 years of service. It felt heavier than I remembered. I walked into the den and stood in front of the bookshelf. The framed commendation from the Air Force still hung on the wall. Next to it, a photo of my last simulator team. 6 new captains I had pushed hard, who had thanked me later. It used to be enough. I took a seat at the desk, pulled out an old yellow legal pad, and wrote one word at the top. Options. It stared back at me, offering no comfort. I wasn't ready to retire, not in spirit. But it was clear that Orion had moved on without me. And not just me, others too. I had seen the signs. Senior mechanics quietly replaced. Longtime flight ops coordinators reassigned. Everything was about margin now. They forgot what made people trust an airline in the first place. It wasn't fuel efficiency charts or digital dashboards. It was knowing there was a human being up there, trained well, calm under pressure, and unwilling to cut corners. People like me. I looked down at the list I hadn't yet started, then tore the page away. Maybe it wasn't about finding another job. Maybe it was about finding the right reason to fly again. I should have driven north, taken the long road up the coast, disappeared into a cabin for a few days, let the dust settle. But instead, I found myself circling back to the airport, not through the main terminal. That would have been too obvious. I still knew the back entrances, the stairwells crew used to avoid the crowd. Muscle memory took me up to the 3rd floor, past the glass-walled briefing rooms, and into the pilot's lounge. 8 pilots were already there. Catherine Lee, Nate Kim, Marcus Dalton, others I had trained, mentored, covered for when family emergencies hit or confidence faltered midair. They stood up when they saw me. "Graham," Nate asked, his voice low. "Is it true?" I nodded once. "Effective this morning." The room stilled. No one moved. They called it restructuring, I said, keeping my tone level. Nothing personal. Catherine snorted. You built the entire training program. It doesn't get more personal than this. Marcus leaned forward. What are you going to do? I shrugged, though it felt heavier than it should have. Take a few days. Reassess. Maybe pick up some consulting work. It was a half-truth. I hadn't even opened the envelope they gave me. This isn't right, Catherine said. You kept this airline running through some of the roughest years. We wouldn't be flying if it weren't for you. I looked around the room. Faces I trusted. Pilots who had become family. You all have flights today. Stay sharp. Don't let this distract you. A moment of silence, then Nate asked, what if we're already distracted? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A call from a number I hadn't seen in years. Harold Quinn. I stepped into the hallway, heart steadying like it always did right before takeoff. Something was shifting. And not just in me, in all of us. Graham, I just heard. Harold Quinn's voice came through the line sharp and tight, like an old engine catching on the first try. They told me it was mutual, he said, that you were ready to step down. Not quite, I replied, watching through the glass as Catherine and the others paced the lounge, frustration building like thunderclouds. It's not how we built Orion, Harold said. That's not how we treat people who gave everything. It's not your airline anymore. A long pause. I could almost hear him clenching his jaw. No, it's not, he admitted. But I still have friends in this industry. One of them is Victor Chen over at Polaris Sky Charter. He's expanding fast, looking for someone to overhaul their entire flight operations and training division, someone with your background. I didn't answer right away. Polaris was a rising name. Corporate and luxury travel, high standards, deep resources. I just walked out, Harold, I said. I need a little time. Take the weekend, he replied without hesitation. I'll set up a meeting for Monday morning, but don't sign anything from Orion. Not a severance, not a non-compete. Understand? Understood. As I hung up, I spotted Brent Holloway walking quickly down the corridor toward the lounge. His face flushed, jaw clenched, body language off. Through the glass, I saw that more pilots had gathered, maybe a dozen now. Word was spreading, and something inside me settled with quiet certainty. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Brent pushed through the lounge doors, the tension in his shoulders visible even beneath the tailored blazer. Don't you all have flights to prepare for? He asked, his voice tight, words clipped. No one moved. Every pilot in that room turned to face me instead. Waiting, watching, I stepped forward, slowly, calmly. Actually, I said, my voice even. I believe there are concerns that need to be addressed before anyone flies today. Brent's eyes narrowed. Captain Ellis is no longer employed by Orion Pacific. Any issues should be submitted through formal channels. You mean through you? Catherine asked, arms crossed, her voice steady and cold. The same person who slashed our simulator hours by a third last month? Brent tugged at his tie. Those changes were based on benchmarking data and efficiency reports. They're compromises? Marcus interjected. And we're the ones dealing with the fallout. You just fired the one person keeping our new captain safe. I raised a hand, keeping the tension from boiling over. This isn't about me. This is about proper procedure, about safety. The pilots here have legitimate concerns, and they deserve to be heard. Brent checked his watch. Flight 1723 to LA boards in 40 minutes. Flight 1190 to Denver, right behind it. We have schedules to maintain. No one moved. That's my flight, Nate said, and I'm not taking off until this is addressed. Brent's jaw clenched. You're contractually obligated to fly. Unless there's a safety concern, I countered. And you know FAA regulations are clear on that. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, and Brent knew it. Brent's lips pressed into a thin line. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling Marshall, he said, stepping aside to make the call. As he turned away, more pilots trickled into the lounge, some still in uniform, others off duty but alert. Word had clearly spread faster than expected. Catherine leaned in beside me. What's the plan, Graham? She asked quietly. There isn't one, I said truthfully. At least, not yet. I just wanted your concerns to be heard. But something was happening in that room. Something bigger than me. It was in the way the pilots stood closer, no longer scattered in casual clusters, but unified. The way conversations hushed when Brent looked their way. The way everyone waited, not for instructions, but for each other. They weren't stalling. They were standing. A movement, born not of rebellion, but of exhausted conviction. Brent returned, smugness in his step. Marshall is on his way. Until then, all personnel are to return to their assigned duties. James Novak, one of our senior captains, stepped forward. Or what? Brent stiffened. Or you'll face disciplinary action, including possible termination. James smiled, slow, measured. I have 26 years in that cockpit and 14 with this airline. You want to explain to the board why you're threatening your senior pilots during peak travel season? The elevator chimed. Everyone turned. Marshal Quinn stepped into the room. Younger than his father, sharper suit, colder eyes. What the hell is going on here? He demanded. I stepped forward. Your pilots have safety concerns. Concerns that have gone ignored for months. Marshall glanced at Brent, then back at me. You no longer work here. This doesn't concern you. It concerns anyone who still believes safety matters more than spreadsheets. And from the silence behind me, I knew I wasn't the only one. This is insubordination. Marshall snapped, scanning the room filled with unmoving pilots. Catherine stepped forward, her voice level. No, sir. This is a formal safety stand-down, initiated under FAA regulations and our union agreement. The words landed hard. Marshall's expression flickered. He wasn't used to pushback, especially not from the people who kept his planes in the sky. Fine, he said after a beat. You have 1 hour to present your concerns in writing. Then everyone returns to their assignments. No exceptions. He turned sharply and walked out, Brent trailing behind like a shadow. As the door clicked shut, the pilots exhaled. The tension hadn't left the room. It had simply shifted into focus. Without needing to be asked, Catherine opened her laptop. A half circle formed around her as the group moved into action. Training cuts, reduced turnaround times, deferred maintenance, fuel load pressures. Each issue was documented, dates and flight numbers listed with precision. I sat off to the side, watching them work. This crew I had trained, tested, and trusted. They weren't angry now. They were methodical, focused, professional. Exactly what I had taught them to be. I stepped into the hallway to make a call. My voice was steady but urgent. Mr. Chen, this is Graham Ellis. Harold Quinn suggested I reach out. There was a pause, then a warm, firm reply. Captain Ellis, I've heard a great deal about you, and from what I understand, Altus Pacific just made a serious mistake. That's one way to put it. Can you meet tomorrow? I'll be there, I said. Anytime. And just like that, something steady began to rise inside me. Not anger, not revenge, purpose. When I returned to the briefing room, the air had changed. The pilots were huddled around Catherine's laptop, their expressions no longer just tense. They were grim. "What is it?" I asked. Daniel looked up and motioned me over. "We were compiling documentation to support the report, and Catherine found something." She turned the screen toward me. Maintenance records. Line after line of them. But the discrepancies were impossible to miss. "Initial reports marked these issues as critical," Catherine said. "But the versions submitted to the FAA downgraded them to advisory." I scrolled. Hydraulic system warnings, brake inspections, electrical faults, all marked safe when they weren't. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. "About 4 months," she replied. "Right after they implemented that new maintenance tracking software." "The one Brent pushed through?" Nate nodded. "Said it would streamline reporting." "This isn't streamlining," I muttered. "This is falsification. It's fraud." Catherine didn't blink. "And it's federal." A heavy silence fell. We all knew what it meant. This wasn't just about safety anymore. It was about legality, about lives. The door opened. Marshall returned, flanked by Brent and 2 unfamiliar men in security uniforms. "Your hour is up," he said coldly. "Brent will review your report. As for Captain Ellis, he'll be escorted off the premises." "We're not done," Catherine said, closing her laptop. "Yes, you are," Marshall replied. "Anyone refusing to report to duty will face immediate termination." I looked straight at him. "Did you know about the falsified reports?" Marshall didn't answer, but something flickered in his eyes, and in that moment I knew he didn't expect to be caught. The security guards didn't say a word as they walked me out. No hand on the shoulder, no escort too tight, just quiet protocol, like I was a piece of equipment being removed from inventory. As we exited through the employee lot, my phone buzzed. A text from Victor Chen. "Meeting confirmed. 9 a.m. tomorrow, Polaris Sky HQ." I replied with a simple, "See you then." Once they were gone, I stayed in my car. Let the quiet wrap around me like a second skin. I wasn't angry, at least not in the loud, destructive way. But something in me had hardened. They didn't just push me out. They were trying to bury the truth with me. I called Harold. "It's worse than we thought," I said. "They've been falsifying safety reports. We've got copies. Catherine has them backed up." There was a pause on the other end, then a sharp exhale. "That explains the profit jump Marshall was bragging about. They're threatening to terminate the crew if they don't fall in line." "Where are you now?" "In my car. They made sure I didn't get near the terminal." "Good. Stay put," he said. "Let me make a few calls." I waited 10 minutes, then 20. Then my phone lit up again. "Nate. Flight 1723 to LA, canceled. Mechanical issue." "Catherine. Flight 1190 to Denver, grounded. No available crew." "James. Same in Phoenix. Sudden delays. Maintenance flagged." One by one, the dominoes fell. No strike, no slogans. Just judgment calls. Quiet decisions by professionals who had decided enough was enough. The sun had dipped below the skyline when my phone rang again. An unfamiliar number. I answered without hesitation. "Captain Ellis?" a woman asked, her voice calm, professional. "This is Lisa Brennan, FAA Safety Compliance Division. We've received preliminary reports about potential falsification of maintenance records at Orion Pacific. Would you be willing to provide a statement?" "Yes," I said. "But I'm not the only one you need to speak with. Catherine Lee, Chief Flight Instructor. She's the one who uncovered the documentation." "We're contacting her as well," Brennan replied. But your perspective as senior captain and former training lead is vital. Can we schedule something within the next 48 hours? I'm available anytime. She thanked me, and the line went dead. I sat back, the weight of everything pressing down, not crushing, but anchoring. For the first time in days, I wasn't uncertain. I had direction. The next morning, I arrived at Polaris Sky headquarters 15 minutes early. Their campus gleamed like ambition made real. Steel and glass, clean lines, crisp uniforms. No tension, no fear, just purpose. Victor Chen met me in the lobby himself. He extended a hand, firm and steady. "Captain Ellis," he said with a slight smile. "You're right on time." He didn't need to say more. We both understood what was unfolding now wasn't just fallout. It was a turning point. Victor led me into a glass-walled conference room on the second floor. The view overlooked the runway, where a sleek Gulf Stream taxied into position. Quiet power in motion. "Orion Pacific is in trouble," Victor began without preamble. "The FAA launched a full investigation last night. Words already hit the market. Their stock dipped 7% before opening." I wasn't surprised. "What may surprise you," he continued, "is that we've been tracking Orion for months. Their cost-cutting made them vulnerable. We've been waiting for the right moment to scale our premium charter division." He slid a folder across the table. I opened it slowly. An employment offer, detailed, generous, and clear. The title at the top read, "Director of Flight Operations and Training, Polaris Sky." "Full autonomy," Victor said. "Build it your way. Safety first. Training restored. Culture redefined. No shortcuts." I ran a hand over the page. For the first time in a long while, the future felt like something I could shape, rather than something being shaped for me. "There's more," he added. "We'd like to offer immediate positions to any Orion captains or first officers you believe in. We're prepared to move fast." I looked up. "How many pilots do you trust, Captain Ellis?" I didn't hesitate. "At least 30. Victor smiled. "Then let's bring them home." And just like that, a broken ending began to turn into a new beginning. One I could believe in. 3 weeks after my termination, I stood in the heart of Polaris Sky's newly completed training facility. The space felt like possibility. 6 full-motion simulators, classrooms wired for real-time scenario reviews, and a hangar-sized emergency response center. Everything I had once asked for at Orion, finally built, finally respected. Victor stood beside me, arms crossed as he surveyed the polished floors and high-glass ceilings. "What do you think?" he asked. "It's exactly what I envisioned," I said. Right on cue, the front doors opened. Catherine was the first to walk in, followed by Nate, Daniel, James, and 24 more, all former Orion pilots, all carrying their flight bags, dressed in civilian clothes, eyes steady. 30 pilots in total. Not just colleagues, believers. "Welcome to Polaris," I said simply. Catherine grinned. "Nice setup you've got, Captain." They moved through the space like they already belonged, testing the feel of the room, running their hands along the simulator frames, joking in low voices, but with reverence, like stepping into something sacred. Victor pulled me aside. "You did it. 30 pilots in one day. That's not onboarding. It's a statement. They're the best," I said, "and they're ready." My phone buzzed. A message from Harold. "Turn on the news." Victor tapped the screen on the wall. The financial channel lit up. Orion Pacific stock was in free fall, down 46% since the investigation began. Trading had been halted, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. The broadcast showed images of grounded aircraft, scrolling tickers, and industry analysts scrambling to explain Orion Pacific's collapse. Harold's voice came through the phone, low but steady. Marshall just resigned. The board forced him out this morning. Brent's gone too, effective immediately. On screen, the anchor confirmed it. Over 340 flights canceled in 3 weeks. Severe staffing shortages. FAA investigators still on site. They're leasing aircraft now, Harold added, paying triple just to keep their core routes alive. I looked around at the room full of pilots. Catherine and James reviewing training protocols, Nate walking a new hire through our systems. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like restoration. Victor turned to address them. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice calm and sure, "welcome to the future of premium aviation." I stood quietly off to the side, arms folded, watching everything come together. Not because I'd forced it, but because the cracks in the old system had made space for something better. I remembered Brent's words the day he let me go. "Your compensation no longer aligns with our growth model." He wasn't wrong. I had simply outgrown the model. And now, every canceled flight, every captain who walked out with me, every passenger rerouted, was proving it. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't in what you say. It's in what you build after they let you go. 6 months later, I stood on the tarmac as Polaris Sky's newest acquisition, a gleaming Boeing 787 Dreamliner, touched down under the soft light of dawn. The wheels kissed the runway clean, reverse thrusters activating with perfect timing. Smooth, controlled, confident. Catherine was in the cockpit. She taxied the aircraft toward the terminal with the precision I'd seen her develop from day one in the simulator. Now she was flying international routes, mentoring others the way I had mentored her. The Dreamliner came to a full stop at Gate 12. Ground crew moved in with practiced grace, securing the aircraft, connecting the jet bridge, prepping it for the next journey. Victor joined me at the observation deck. "You built something remarkable," he said, voice quiet, sincere. "We built it," I corrected, eyes still on the plane. "Every one of them chose to fly forward instead of looking back." He nodded. "Orion's new board reached out. They want to meet. Said they're hoping you'll return, help rebuild." I didn't flinch, just kept watching as Catherine stepped off the aircraft and waved up at us. "They're sending someone?" I asked. Victor nodded. "An envoy, this week." I exhaled slowly, not bitter, just clear. "Then I'll tell them what I know for certain. I'm exactly where I belong. Tomorrow, I'd fly again. Not because I had to, but because I'd earned the right to keep doing what I love on my terms. Not grounded. Just charting a better course. I was reviewing simulator updates when I heard the knock on my office door. Software familiar. Emily stepped in, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a coffee in her hand. "You didn't tell me it looked like this," she said, eyes scanning the room. "This place is incredible." I stood surprised. "Thought you had finals." "Finished early," she smiled. "Figured it was time I saw where you disappeared to after Orion." She followed me down the corridor, past the training bays, the simulator chambers, the classrooms lined with navigational charts and flight data. She took it all in, not with polite curiosity, but with focused attention. "These pilots," she said, nodding toward a debrief in progress, "you trained them." "Most of them," I replied. "Some I mentored. A few I chased through weather systems and emergencies. But yes, they're mine." We stood at the observation deck again, where months earlier I'd watched Catherine land the Dreamliner. "Back then," Emily said, When you missed things, birthdays, holidays, I used to think you chose the job over me. I stayed silent, heart tightening. But now I get it, she continued. You weren't chasing planes. You were building something real. She turned to me. And maybe I want to be a part of it. I searched her face, the same determination I had seen in my pilots, only gentler, more personal. You sure? I asked. She nodded. I've got some flying to do, Dad. Just not the way I thought. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was closing a chapter. I was passing the torch